Several hours into Mina the Hollower, I was this close to dropping the game entirely. Everything I had seen and heard made it out to be a perfect 10 out of 10 experience, but I just wasn't getting it. All reviews are subjective, of course, but after clawing my way through those opening hours, which mostly consisted of some small glimpses of greatness through a thick cloud of frustrating mechanics and gameplay design, I was starting to think that either I, or everyone else, was taking crazy pills. I haven't played Yacht Club Games' prior hit, Shovel Knight, and was approaching Mina completely blind to their style of development, expecting a fairly standard pixel art platformer with a mix of combat and exploration. While not anticipating a total cakewalk, I also wasn't prepared for the brick wall of difficulty that I slammed headfirst into. That internal battle raged on, and I was tempted to scrap my playthrough and move on to something else, but kept pushing through the pain, hoping for a single sign of something worthwhile on the other side that would help me understand what everyone else was loving. My epiphany came when stubbornness finally broke through that seemingly insurmountable barrier, and I slowly began to see its greatness more clearly. I'm glad I didn't give up on Mina the Hollower, as by the end of my almost 30 hours with Yacht Club's latest installment, I did find the magic so many others had too. A huge part of that shift was an adjustment of my internal expectations. Instead of approaching Mina as just another 2D platformer with exploration, traversal, and combat, my mindset shifted into the mode I enter when playing Souls titles. And with my approach appropriately calibrated, my enjoyment skyrocketed too. Mina is absolutely not a Souls game. It borrows mechanics and inspirations from a slew of genres: Souls-like difficulty, Metroidvania exploration, tight platforming, combat, and more. But it doesn't fit cleanly into any of those designations. Despite not being a Souls-like, approaching it with the mental fortitude and determination required to overcome the challenges of those titles helped alleviate some of my frustrations and allowed me to appreciate the game for what it really is: a brutally difficult, incredibly designed, yet noticeably flawed experience that I'm very thankful to have not passed up. Mina is a tale centered around its titular character, who is a member of the Hollowers Guild, a small band of adventurers who can hollow, or burrow underground. Mina is especially renowned as an inventor of spark generators, massive towers that power Tenebrous Isle, the story's setting, and its capital city of Osix. Unfortunately, something has gone wrong with her inventions, which are now corrupting the island, and she has been summoned to restore them. After arriving and coming under attack by fearsome creatures, Mina meets with Lionel, the leader of Osix and Tenebrous, and sets off on her quest, with us controlling her as she battles through corrupted entities and environmental obstacles to repair her broken creations. Throughout this journey, she'll encounter all manner of quirky characters, ranging from regular old humans and her fellow anthropomorphized creatures, to far more fantastical and terrifying entities. As Mina restores each generator, her feats are retold in the local newspaper, recapping each exploit and providing hints on what part of the island requires her attention next. You can kinda tell where this story is headed right from the start, and its concluding confrontation played out pretty much exactly as expected. There's a nice closing summary of how the places and characters Mina encountered end up, although without getting into spoilers, the game's ending was not at all what I anticipated. There are some nice narrative touches, like conversations between characters to expand on the plot, or brief moments of respite where Mina might stop to rest after restoring a generator, or in some cases, stay awake through the night instead, thinking deeply on the merits of her quest and conflicting goals of other characters involved. Overall, Mina's tale and the world of Tenebrous are fairly interesting, and serve well enough as the framework to facilitate this story. But narrative was one area that felt a bit lacking. While the setting and setup are both cool, they ultimately felt very surface level and largely unexplored throughout the course of Mina's journey, short conversations and scattered writings aside. Not much is done to flesh out these characters and their backgrounds, beyond the shortest of introductions and explanations, along with a small bit of extra info within the in-game manual. While this is largely consistent with the subdued, obtuse manner of storytelling one might expect in a Souls-esque game, even those typically feature more world building and lore, if only through item descriptions or seemingly nonsensical scribblings. Unless I happen to miss a bunch of items or conversations, which based on the sheer amount of hidden content is entirely plausible. This wasn't a problem for me, and while learning more about this world and its inhabitants would have been a plus, presentation and gameplay were the clear focuses of Yacht Club's design, and on those fronts they deliver, a few glaring gripes aside. Mina is portrayed through an 8-bit style meant to evoke the same look and feel of old-school classics, and it absolutely nails that goal, with pixel-perfect graphics and a soundtrack that brought me back to the days of arcade games with my dad at the mall, or hiding under the covers with my Game Boy Advance way past my bedtime. From its very first opening cutscene, Mina wears its artistic inspirations on its sleeve and shouts them from the rooftops. Its retro design is captured perfectly, transporting you right back to those days of yore, and it both looks and sounds fantastic, whether playing on a big screen or handheld device. the latter of which is a match made in heaven for this style. Each pixel comprising the game's characters and sound effect during combat nails that artistic vision, and just scrolling through its menus is a treat, which feels and sounds like your favorite game at that mall arcade. Mina's quasi-top-down approach to viewing its world is equally impressive, and offers the perfect blend of visuals that toe the line between confusing and unique, while remaining digestible and easy to navigate during gameplay. Its locations are gorgeous already, and would be memorable regardless, but combining these vistas with that bird's-eye view results in a combination that perfectly accentuates each colorful dot in a background, or visual effect popping up on screen. Every biome is beautiful in its own way, from ice-covered mountains to sludgy swamps, or a forest that seems ripped straight out of a Hallmark Halloween movie, or maybe a horror film. But one location in particular, the Astral Orrery, absolutely blew me away with its colorful, unique, and, well, astral design. This was one of the coolest video game levels I've had the pleasure of experiencing in quite some time. Enemies also feature unique designs, and weapons have their own look and secondary effects as they whip, hammer, or slash their way through your foes. Something as simple as activating Mina's healing ability sends a shower of golden sparks into the air, while she raises her pixelated hand in defiance as that spark of invigoration restores her health bar, and each aspect of the game fits that retro design to a T. Character models and their portraits during conversations are awesome in a way that only this old-school style can evoke. And while these graphics are much simpler than the cutting edge of visuals today, each and every rock, NPC, or boss you encounter all perfectly encapsulate this style, with those biggest baddies featuring some of the coolest, craziest, and best designs. Mina's soundtrack is the perfect complement for its looks, and reminded me quite a bit of Celeste, another one of my favorites that follows a similar design philosophy. Whether it's quiet, subtle background music during a restful moment or a synthetic, ear-blasting frenzy enhancing a boss fight, this is a series of songs that I could throw on in the background at work or while hitting the gym and still be able to find a perfect tune to fit the mood. This retro presentation allows for more wiggle room when it comes to performance, and the game ran flawlessly on my PC, although the experience on Steam Deck was a bit lacking, much to my surprise and disappointment. Options for visuals and audio are fairly basic, but Mina offers a huge variety of customization when it comes to gameplay. This includes remapping controls, but goes above and beyond with guides on gameplay and a checklist for tracking achievements. However, the most impressive inclusion by far is a massive system for tweaking its difficulty, with dozens upon dozens of unique modifiers. The variety, customizability, and sheer number of selections is simply staggering. These include plenty of individual tweaks to make things easier or harder, along with presets that toggle different groupings. Although anyone asking for more punishment must be one sick puppy, since the game is already more than hard enough, at least for someone like me. Enabling modifiers to make things easier will disable achievements, so for the trophy hunters out there, this is a non-starter. I gritted my teeth and stuck with the baseline difficulty, but if my ranting about this level of challenge is disconcerting, don't fret. Turning things down a couple of notches would be well worth the loss of achievements if it means getting to experience Mina. This is where I'd mention any bugs I ran into, but I'm happy to report that not a single glitch or gameplay issue was spotted. There was one instance where I thought the hollowing mechanic bugged out, but I was just failing to understand the obstacle in my way, and Yacht Club deserves props for putting out such a finely polished product. That polish also extended to performance on PC. Running at a locked 120 frames at 1440p with an NVIDIA 5080 and Ryzen 7 78X3D, the game ran like a dream, with not a single stutter, frame drop, or performance issue to be seen. Unfortunately, while Mina is Steam Deck verified and seems like a match made in heaven for handheld hardware, it ran noticeably worse on that device, even at a locked 60 FPS. When the frame rate was consistent, the experience was immaculate, and transitioning from controller to the Steam Deck's gamepad was seamless. But the frame rate would often chug down, and when it did, Mina's movement and performance in combat felt noticeably worse, which is a big deal when its gameplay requires precise timings and inputs. I wouldn't steer anyone away from playing on a handheld entirely, but be aware of those considerations. Mina borrows gameplay elements from a variety of genres, with traversal and combat at the core of this loop. And while there is a lot of good here, it's unfortunately where the title also fell the flattest. Platforming is excellent, and combat itself feels good, even great at times, but there are some truly frustrating and baffling design decisions that weigh down an otherwise excellent offering. Mina's first several hours had me constantly asking myself, damn, is it supposed to be this difficult? Again, this was partially due to my own incorrect expectations, but beyond that, the design of some encounters and enemies, while intentional additives to that level of difficulty, still left me baffled and continually frustrated on why Yacht Club felt the need to include them, when combat already felt largely complete. For starters, enemies can attack from any direction, up and down, side to side, and diagonally, and they often do, with many foes swooping out of the air or jumping up and crashing down from every which way. But, for some reason, you can only attack in those 4 core directions. This results in desperate attempts to position Mina to actually land her attacks, all while enemies duck, dash, and dive in every direction, which creates the feeling of being battered from all sides, yet unable to respond thanks to being stunned and often knocked right off the map into all manner of environmental hazards. The ultimate result was becoming stuck in a loop of being attacked by enemies, knocked into a hazard, respawning, and then being knocked straight back into the abyss with barely a chance to respond or even flee the scene. There was one point where I said to myself, if I get knocked into water, lava, or off a ledge one more time, I'm gonna lose it. And these combinations of enemies and platforming were a real pain. Hearing that probably sounds ludicrous, because Mina is built around enemies and platforming. And there were plenty of encounters that felt perfectly fine and frankly awesome. But whenever these artificial difficulty components were thrown into the mix, they only made the game feel worse than its best moments. And listen, I get it. Enemies attacking during traversal and navigating the environment during combat is nothing new. But the frequency with which Mina seems to rely on these mechanics to bump up its difficulty just felt unnecessary, unfun, and frankly, quite bad. There were way too many annoying artificial deaths, and when a game has you saying, "Come on, man," one too many times, it starts to lose some of its appeal. This did gradually get better, as you are extremely weak in those opening hours, then slowly progress and grow stronger, becoming more skilled in combat and well equipped to negate some of these mechanics. But that poor experience always lingered to some degree. Some people will hear all this and say, just get good. And to be clear, I have no problem tackling difficult games. I love a good challenge, whether it's a Souls-like, Metroidvania, or anything else. And I can even stand some artificial difficulty sprinkled in, but when it starts feeling like a design crutch, it becomes an issue. I don't want to scare anyone off by saying all this. There are the myriad modifiers to make things easier, and that natural progression curve also eases your suffering over time. There are some excellent, heart-pounding moments when you barely beat a boss or make it through a traversal challenge with 1 drop of health left to spare, and those moments are exactly what I love in games like this. I only wish their forced counterparts were a little less egregious. Before engaging with the puzzle or combat, Mina has to find a fitting loadout to tackle the situation, and there is a massive variety of weapons, gear, and upgrades with which to outfit our little mousy friend. Her loadout begins with a weapon, and the game's opening moments offer a choice between a giant hammer, dual daggers, or Mina's signature whip, which was my tool of choice. This selection will largely determine your initial playstyle, as each weapon is quite distinct. The hammer can be charged up for extra damage, while the whip can strike enemies from a relatively safer distance. All weapons can be discovered or purchased later on, so no need to worry about missing out based on your initial selection. Each also comes with 2 upgrades to acquire, which add extra functionality, like a stationary spinning attack for the whip, or provide benefits like boosted damage. While I experimented with other weapons a bit, I always returned to my trusty whip, but each time a new armament popped up was still a total treat. The Guardian Casket, a giant bony shield, was a close second favorite, enabling Mina to parry enemies at the precise right moment, knocking them back and dishing out damage. I'm a huge sucker for a solid parry, and this one did not disappoint. There's even a dual-use melee and ranged blaster, and switching between close quarters and ranged combat without relying on sidearms was a game changer. Speaking of, the next component of Mina's repertoire is sidearms, of which there are a huge variety, ranging from simple throwing knives to more exotic options like a healing dash, summonable ghosts, or a bicycle that you can ride straight into enemies. And eventually, you unlock the ability to equip 2 at once. They do require ammo in the form of jewels, one of the game's various pickups that are obtained from combat and exploration. Where things really get interesting are trinkets, equipable items with a huge variety of effects and benefits, which really flesh out any given build. These range from flat boosts for your core stats, attack, defense, or sidearms, all pretty self-explanatory, to more differentiated options, some of which are flat out necessary if you want to see and experience everything Mina has to offer. These can enable additional movement tech like climbing walls, a double jump, and gliding through the air, to providing secondary attacks like explosions while burrowing or aerial strikes, along with boosting survivability via more healing charges or increasing their potency. Trinkets can be bought, found, or dropped by enemies, and there is a massive list to acquire. Speaking of healing, the mechanic in Mina is fairly basic, but with a little twist. Health is restored by healing charges called plasma vials. However, before healing, you need to first rebuild your plasma meter, which replaces lost health by dealing damage to enemies. So, while you can just spam healing charges, it's much more effective to dish out some good damage first and extract their full potential. While this can lead to some minor frustrations when you really need to heal but have no plasma, it encourages aggression and engagement with the enemy, and I never found the system overly oppressive. There's even more gear and items to acquire, such as different cloaks to boost Mina's stats further, which can also be customized in great detail at one of the vendors in Osix, along with other consumables like keys, used to unlock sealed passageways and chests. Finally, as Mina explores and defeats enemies, she'll accumulate bones, which can be spent on leveling up and purchasing upgrades and items. They can also be converted into bone stone, a risk-free alternative that, unlike the base currency, is not lost upon death. While bones do disappear after one too many demises, the game is actually less punishing in this regard than most. Mina carries several spark charges, and one charge is dropped upon each death, either attaching to the enemy who landed the killing blow, or falling on the ground if you died during Traversal. Recover at least one orb before your final death, and all bones will be preserved. I lost quite a few chunks in those early hours, which easily wiped out several levels worth of progress, but this does get better as you acquire more spark charges. Currency scaling always felt fair, with later zones providing a constant stream that made boning up, yes, that is what the game calls it, attainable even at the highest levels. And despite those early losses, I still managed to max out all 3 stats. There was one specific instance where you're forced to farm bones to advance the main story, which was pretty surprising and disruptive based on overall progression. And while that hour was an annoying slog that broke up my flow, it was the one and only time this came up, so I'm willing to give it a pass. Along with Mina's progression, Osix itself will gradually open up as you restore more generators and unlock upgrades that provide access to previously blocked off areas. The city is stuffed with different vendors, like a blacksmith who improves weapons, a shop to buy trinkets, and more, with many of their owners being quite eccentric. If a giant arm flies out of nowhere and grabs you, don't worry about it too much, he's just trying to make a sale. Then there's the Hollowers Guild, where you can conspire with Mina's fellow burrowers, some of which function as vendors for improving your underlab. The underlab serves as home base, and can be accessed from any of the checkpoints scattered throughout the world. Here, you can level up, swap weapons and trinkets, replenish vials, and after purchasing some upgrades, access a map or change the look of your space. Bottom line, there are tons of items available, and that's before upgrading your weapons and capacity for equipping more trinkets and sidearms. You can create entire builds based around specific encounters, exploration, and more, and Yacht Club crafted a gear system that is fantastic and a joy to engage with. With all that gear to acquire, Mina does an excellent job of providing combat encounters to overcome and traversal challenges to tackle while exploring this well-crafted world, excluding those artificial difficulty pitfalls that hold it back. Combat is extremely brutal to start, but becomes more manageable as your understanding of enemies improves and you acquire additional gear. While it feels largely great in the mid to late game, those minor hiccups never go away, and this combat design still feels lacking at times because of them. Mina's survivability and damage are laughably weak to start, and looking back at just how badly I struggled with some early foes, the very first elite enemy, not even a true boss, took several attempts to overcome, made me chuckle. However, learning their movesets makes defeating foes easier over time and helps make tackling new ones feel like less of a struggle. Enemy design, bullshit attacks aside, is actually quite good, with a huge variety of foes to face off against across the game's various biomes. These distinctions are both visual and mechanical, ensuring each new encounter is a breath of fresh air, albeit difficult, and you never feel bored when retreading old ground. This cast spans everything from armored knights, zombies and demonic bats, to giant magical suits and bizarre amalgamations of creature and machine, and that's just a tiny sample of this massive bestiary. Each enemy features their own specific attacks, from simple strikes with a sword or pitchfork to massive energy explosions, magical projectiles, and more. My favorite opponents were tiny floating boxes that, when alerted to your presence and not dispatched quickly enough, kidnap you into a small separate arena, and if you fail to overcome this new challenge in time, dish out massive damage before skittering away. There are quite a few flying enemies to contend with, and mastering the art of jump attacks was a huge piece of the combat puzzle. These were also some of the worst culprits of those uncanny attacks and platform pushing, and while they too became easier over time, there was always a chance you'd get caught in an awful, inescapable loop, especially when attacked by more than one at once. Another important component of combat is healing at the appropriate time, as Mina must contend with an extremely extended animation to do so. If struck during that process, it's goodbye plasma vial and no health restored. There are trinkets that speed up this process or preserve your interrupted charges, which are almost a necessity to keep up with the frantic pace of combat. There were some other annoying mechanics sprinkled in, like enemies that would vanish and then reappear right underneath you, which doesn't sound too bad on its own, but when paired with all the other combat and movement, this often got lost in the shuffle and resulted in more than a couple of deaths that felt a tad undeserved. At its core, Mina's combat feels really good to engage with when not dragged down by annoying design, which made it even more baffling why any of that was included, because when the battle is flowing, it feels really damn good. Despite those issues, its roster of enemies was a treat to engage with, and this impressive variety also extends to Mina's bosses, which were the true highlight of combat. The sheer variety of visual design and unique mechanics these named opponents offered was staggering, with no reused or rehashed encounters, or really anything that felt remotely the same. Each fight lived up to the enemy's on-screen presence and ultimately felt mostly fair, despite some initial misgivings. This world is littered with not only unavoidable duels that must be overcome to advance the main quest, but a plethora of optional and hidden encounters that offer some of the best fights in the game. And despite finding quite a few of them, I have no doubt there are even more out there still undiscovered. These boss designs span the typical range of large single entities, spellcasters, minion summoners, and even some fights that incorporate platforming and puzzle solving as secondary or even primary mechanics. Their visual designs are incredibly varied, with everything from giant brains and eyeballs to evil scarecrows and ghastly corrupted creatures making an appearance. Not one single encounter seemed to borrow from the visuals of another, and this diversity extends to their mechanics too. Fighting these foes was never too difficult, which was somewhat surprising but also makes sense considering these are straight-up fights against a single opponent, or at most a few little minions. And even when dealing with environmental hazards, they never felt shoehorned in for the sake of difficulty. Each fight felt fair, although I did have some trepidation after a couple early encounters before another epiphany on how to approach these fights. Two bosses got under my skin, not because they took a long time to complete, but due to what initially seemed like reliance on frustrating hitboxes and unreadable attacks. Thankfully, this wasn't the case, and it turned out I hadn't grasped the proper way to approach these fights until realizing that with certain bosses, engaging them from the correct plane, horizontal or vertical depending on the fight in question, made all the difference, and after that, my frustrations melted away. A couple of runbacks were an absolute pain in the ass, and actually pissed me off more than the fights themselves, but in at least one of these cases, there was a hidden checkpoint nearby that would have eased my passing, and this is thankfully one annoying mechanic that Yacht Club decided to skip. What impressed me most was that the best fights were entirely optional, with some hidden behind complex quests that one might easily miss, or decide not to complete. I almost gave up on one of these challenges, but pushed through, expecting nothing more than some brief dialogue and an item for my trouble. But it actually led to my favorite fight in the game, with great boss design, cool mechanics, and a powerful reward to boot. There were even a couple of bosses I didn't find until after completing the main story, and were more hidden encounters I'm glad to have stumbled across. Completing these fights rewards permanent health upgrades, along with the whole slew of trinkets and other items, and they were always worth seeking out. I won't spoil it because it's really worth experiencing yourself, but the final boss battle was a perfect encapsulation of all the best design elements from each foe that preceded it. Unique mechanics, challenging but ultimately attainable difficulty, a crazy visual spectacle, and an emotional payoff that served as a fitting conclusion to Mina's journey. For those like me who have a true appreciation for well-crafted, engaging, and memorable boss encounters, Mina absolutely exceeds that bar. And I've found myself thinking back on several of these fights every day since beating them. In order to find these awesome encounters, exploration and traversal are required, and this gameplay element was my clear-cut favorite, featuring some incredibly tight platforming, varied tools, and rewarding unguided exploration, all housed within the complex, interconnected Isle of Tenebris. There are clear Metroidvania influences in the singular overworld and way in which certain areas are only accessible once more abilities and tools have been unlocked. And this map is filled with enough secrets to match almost any title in that genre. As its namesake indicates, hollowing is one of the primary ways in which Mina interacts with the world around her, and mastering when and how to burrow underground, not only during exploration but combat as well, is hugely important. In addition to avoiding enemy attacks, Mina can burrow to get past obstacles, and timing her emergence just right allows for an extended leap through the air, helping reach far-off places that are otherwise inaccessible. As mentioned earlier, there's plenty of gear to improve maneuverability as you navigate these spaces, and finding the right set of trinkets for each zone is a little game within the game that incentivizes trying out different tools. Each section of Tenebris not only looks incredible, with a diversity in appearance that ensures exploration never feels boring, but they are also incredibly dense, packed full of optional rooms, secrets to uncover, and those hidden boss fights I already raved about. Each time you stumble upon a new zone feels like finding the door to a brand new adventure. But before experiencing that shiny newness, you must often figure out how to access these spaces, which are often blocked off by a previously undiscovered mechanic. I got stumped for a bit on a couple, but was always able to push forward through trial and error. And each time I discovered the new move or interaction I had been missing was an aha moment, which felt amazing once things finally clicked. There's always a path forward, you just need to find it, and the game does a fantastic job of subtly indicating where to go next or how to proceed. There was one area that bamboozled me so badly, I went online in search of help, and after finding out how to proceed, I could have kicked myself for spoiling the answer instead of just paying attention to what was right in front of me the whole time. There are so many ways to interact with these spaces, whether picking up objects and hurling them at enemies or obstacles, lighting things on fire, or engaging with traversal mechanics specific to each zone. Part of mastering Mina is overcoming the challenges posed by these biomes, and their dungeons, which range from fighting wind gusts while platforming, to navigating slippery ice blocks, or jumping through pitch-black darkness by the light of floating candles. All of these mechanics are introduced at a pace that keeps traversal feeling fresh, and are the perfect balance of simple to pick up, but hard to master, especially during more difficult sections. Some were less engaging than others, like annoying lightning towers that still managed to zap me with their electric attacks even when seemingly safe. But overall, each obstacle felt fair and reasonable to figure out. And even after gaining an initial understanding, I'd often return later and discover secondary interactions that enhanced exploration even further. Each zone features optional collectibles and challenges, often hidden behind environmental triggers or platforming sequences. And while there were a couple I simply didn't have the skill or fortitude to overcome, I made every effort to pry these secrets apart, and each felt rewarding and earned. Paying close attention to those subtle cues is paramount, not only for figuring out these puzzles, but for advancing into each new area. Some traversal sections were a doozy, and took quite a few tries to complete. Nothing on the level of, say, the hardest challenges in Celeste, but pretty damn difficult, although they still felt fair and balanced in the end. Many NPCs and unmarked quests are scattered throughout this wilderness, and completing these assignments provides some of the best gear in the game. I spent 30 minutes trying to reattach a statue's missing head, only to give up out of frustration. When I came back later, the realization occurred that I had been trying to reattach it to the wrong statue, and all I could do was laugh and appreciate Yacht Club's excellent quest design. Whether battling it out with a deadly bunny rabbit, dealing with a family of leaves, or anything else in between, Tenebris is full of funny, memorable encounters. Some I flat out failed, and I'm sure there were plenty more I never even stumbled upon, but these hidden interactions were always Mina's best content. This unmarked quest structure was another very Souls-esque gameplay component, and while many such mechanics aren't exclusive or defining to that genre, it was one I associated with Mina way more than expected. The game is fairly generous with its checkpoint placement, even if some are hidden, and while most movement between zones will be on foot, you never feel too far removed from your base. Map upgrades were insta-buys as soon as they became available, and while fairly basic, only showing discovered zones and how many collectibles have been acquired in each, even that extra info was helpful. Although, playing for almost 30 hours and barely breaking 50% completion blew my mind. There's plenty of danger out in the Isle, but also opportunities to stop and take a breather by enjoying little mini-games, like burrowing through rings or fishing, which offers its own little chase in the form of acquiring all of the unique creatures scattered throughout the island. There is fast travel thanks to Ossix's train stations, which once repaired, enable travel between specific points in a select few zones. This comes in handy when retreading old ground, although trekking back through each area while looking for more undiscovered secrets was always my personal preference. And there are tons of cutbacks and shortcuts within and between areas to unlock that make these trips even easier. I'm actually the kind of player who prefers a little more hand-holding than Mina offers, but never felt stumped to the point of utter frustration. If you ever feel stuck, make sure to pay really close attention to your surroundings, and every time I had one of those aha moments and realized what I'd been missing, it seemed completely obvious in retrospect. The 6 spark generators serve as end caps to each major zone, as you scramble up and around their twisting, winding surfaces, which are thematic to the area you just explored, and require deft movement and a grasp of local mechanics to overcome before restoring them to working order. These were very well implemented and intense, and while difficult at times, admittedly due to my own shortcomings, they were always a fitting way to end an initial run through each zone. The first was an absolute treat, and really wowed me with the uniqueness of its design, and while subsequent towers were more challenging and sometimes frustrating, they remained consistently enjoyable. Overall, Mina's exploration and traversal, its characters, quests, puzzles, and challenges were the absolute shining stars of this experience. And although boss fights were a close second, peeling back the layers of this world was incredibly engaging and the best part of my time on Tenebris Isle. I spent just under 30 hours on my first run of Mina, before concluding with that final boss encounter. Apparently, there's a point of no return warning that I somehow missed, but you should have a pretty good idea of when the game is approaching its conclusion. And the good news is that even though a new Game Plus mode becomes available after rolling credits, you can jump back into your original save and keep exploring, which is exactly what I did. In that extra hour or two, I made my way to several new areas and discovered 2 additional boss fights, and 28 hours was only enough to get just above 50% completion. It felt like I had done a pretty good job of at least trying to be thorough during exploration, but apparently this wasn't the case. And there is so much to find, see, and experience that another 20 or so hours to uncover everything else would come as no surprise. Reflecting on my time with Mina, I'm so glad I stuck with it. Those first few hours were absolutely brutal, nearly breaking my will to go on, and I still have some gripes with its gameplay, but in the end, playing through it to experience this story, combat, and wonderful exploration was unquestionably worth the pain. It's far from a perfect game, but despite those issues, I have no problem recommending it to anyone, regardless of your comfortability with difficulty, and receiving all of this polished content for a mere $20 is an absolute steal. Yacht Club has delivered one of this year's best bang for your buck experiences, and for that reason alone, I wholeheartedly recommend Mina the Hollower. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more gaming content, and let me know your thoughts on Mina in the comments below. Did you find it as challenging or annoying as I did? Was it the perfect platforming experience you were hoping for? Or are you still too turned off by its potential difficulty to give it a go? Either way, thank you for watching. You're a real one and I appreciate you and hope to see you in the next one. Catch you later!